Amazing transformation revealed. How a forgotten veteran saved a downed helicopter in a surprising turn of events. The wind howled through the branches as Jake Thompson stumbled onto the cracked pavement, his breath catching in his throat at the sight of the wreckage before him. The helicopter lay in a twisted heap, smoke coiling into the crisp autumn air. The memories flickered like ghosts, flashes of armor, combat, a brotherhood bruised in battles long past. But now? All he felt was a gnawing emptiness that threatened to swallow him whole. The once decorated Gulf War veteran now stood on the outskirts of action, frightfully aware that the young soldiers crawling from the wreckage might as well have been speaking a different language a generation away from his own experience. Beyond the roars of a few emergency vehicles was a crowd of onlookers, some expressing curiosity while others emanated distrust. The indifference that had haunted him, festering like an open wound, felt magnified in this moment. Just a shadow among shadows, Jake hesitated, wrestling with the urge to stay behind the perimeter, where safety reigned and all eyes were diverted from him. Help him! The scream pierced through him, igniting dormant embers of the man he once was. For a brief instant, an overwhelming determination surged within him. Who else but a veteran could offer assistance? Yet doubt crept like a vine, choking his resolve. What if he failed to act? What if he was just a reminder of a past that no one wanted to remember? Before he could rationalize further, instincts took over. At the front line of chaos, he rushed toward the wreck. The torrent of conflicting feelings battered at him, an urgent compulsion to help battling the insidious shadows whispering that he was rightly abandoned, just as he had been since returning. A pilot lay trapped beneath twisted metal, the gnarled remnants of a dream that had just begun for him. There was bravery reflected in those terrified eyes. Was that what Jake wanted? To reclaim that spark, even if it meant risking everything. Before we continue, I need to tell you about something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to the system, and many people are losing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, click the bell and mark all notifications so you don't miss the next videos. And if you can leave a like, it really helps with reach. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen. Now let's continue. Every second grew heavier, his heart racing under the weight of determination and fear. As he pressed against the steel, aching muscles protested, reminding him he was no longer that young soldier running into battle but a middle-aged man haunted by what-ifs. The piercing sounds of the world around him dulled as he held the pilot's gaze, a flicker of hope dancing in those wide, scared eyes. How could he ignore the plight of a future that reflected his own past? Combining determination with urgency, he pried loose the wreckage, feeling alive yet reminded that he treaded a thin line between revelry and shame. But what would happen after? The weight of unspoken truths pulled heavily on his conscience. Sure, he could save this soldier, but what about the ongoing cycle of questionable military practices? Shouldn't someone speak up? The flames of uncertainty licked at him from all sides. If he acknowledged the danger, would he lose the newfound respect beginning to sprout from his act of courage? Jake stood trembling on the edge of reckoning, the echoes of possibility swirling in the charged air. Could he dare confront the shadows looming in the wake of his heroic act? The town's perception of him began to shift, yet the thoughts of his silent conflict loomed larger than ever. The clock ticked loudly against his chest, underscoring the pangs of anguish clashing within. What awaited him at the end of this reckoning? Would he be able to face his truth, or would he slip back into obscurity, just another forgotten veteran? The stakes continued to rise, leaving him teetering on the precipice of choice, a gamble that could shatter everything he had just begun to build. The roar of sirens faded slightly, yet the chaos around him surged in stark contrast. As Jake continued to pry at the wreckage, the pilot's face became a mirror reflecting his own fears and aspirations. Each breath he took was a reminder of the fear that had long overshadowed his life, a fear of returning to a world that viewed him as an empty shell of a once heroic figure. What if he could change that perception today? With a final heave, he dislodged the last piece of twisted metal, freeing the pilot, who gasped for air. Relief washed over them both, but with it came a rush of panic. Now what? Jake's hands trembled as he felt the surge of adrenaline begin to dissipate, leaving behind the familiar grip of uncertainty. In saving someone, had he inadvertently invited scrutiny upon himself? The way the crowd reacted, their faces animated with a mix of horror and admiration, felt like a double-edged sword. "Stay with me, buddy," he said, kneeling beside the pilot, focusing on the man he had just saved rather than the people watching. But their whispers clawed at his brain, igniting insecurities that had taken root over the years. Would they ever truly see him as a hero, or just another vet with a broken past? The pilot's eyes, cloudy but filled with gratitude, drew Jake back to the moment. "Thank you," the young man gasped, still disoriented but alive. The words hit Jake like gunfire, a sudden burst of recognition for the cost it took to be there. In that instant, he understood that his actions transcended fear. They were a stepping stone toward healing, a way to reclaim his lost identity. As the emergency crew arrived, ready to take over the situation, Jake stood back to watch. Their focused expertise reminded him of his own past when military units functioned with flawless precision. But now, standing among the living embodiment of real danger, he felt the ache of a decision pulling at him. With his heart racing and pulse pounding, thoughts began to congeal into clarity. It wasn't merely duty that had compelled him to act, it was the potent realization that he, too, could be of value once more, the camaraderie he missed, the heady feeling of partnership forged in battle. Perhaps it could exist beyond the war. But with this epiphany came a grim understanding: action, however noble, bore the cost of scrutiny. People would ask future questions. Why had he disappeared all those years? What had he experienced that alienated him from their reality? The fire trucks pulled in close, their lights flashing vibrantly, an intrusive reminder that heroes never belonged solely to shadows. They were set against the backdrop of public gazes, constant evaluation, and sometimes judgment. Jake's stomach churned. Could he shoulder the weight of authenticity, or would his past continue to shame him into silence? The pilot was lifted gently onto the stretcher, but just as they wheeled him away, Jake's resolve crystallized. This was his opportunity, a chance not only to transform himself but also to contribute to a narrative that deserved to be told. He could challenge the brutal realities of military practices that had haunted him and redefine what it meant to serve and sacrifice. Driven by a newfound purpose and battling the fears of stepping into the light, he made his way toward the crowd. As a murmuring wave of curiosity washed over the onlookers, Jake took a deep breath, ready to confront both his demons and the world around him. A senior officer pointed in his direction, and the crowd turned to face him, their expressions shifting from shock to an engrossed anticipation. At that pivotal moment, as they all gazed at him, Jake became acutely aware that this was not just about one act of bravery. It was about the potential for change, for self-discovery, and renewing connections he had long abandoned. The time had come to face the truth about himself, his identity, and the memories that had kept him shackled for so long. As whispers rustled amidst the crowd, Jake's voice steadied, the air thick with expectation. "I need to tell you something." Was it the moment of truth he had always feared, or the beginning of a new journey? That question loomed in the silence, ripe with possibility, as a shift in perception awaited. Jake inhaled deeply, feeling the weight of a world that had once become familiar but now seemed foreign. The murmuring crowd stared back at him, a sea of uncertain faces and muffled expectations. It was time to move past the sirens and chaos, to translate this moment of bravery into something more enduring. "Every hero has a story," he began, his voice quivering but firm. "But mine is tangled with shadows that I thought defined me." Each word felt like a confession, unearthing the buried thoughts that had festered within for far too long. As he spoke, Jake could almost visualize the pillars of his past honor, shame, and the glint of memories that haunted his solitude. "I served in the military, and I made choices that haunt me still. I lost friends, faced my demons, and returned only to find myself adrift." He paused, assessing their reactions. Surprise mingled with empathy, and in that moment, he recognized a sense of kinship with these strangers. He was not alone. But something changed today. he continued, his voice gaining strength. I faced the wreckage and remembered what it felt like to be part of something bigger. He could feel the flicker of hope within himself, igniting a forgotten spark. When I pulled that pilot from the flames, I realized that I might still matter. That I could give, not just take. A ripple of murmurs spread through the crowd, their curiosity transforming into something warmer, a recognition of shared humanity. Could vulnerability truly be a form of bravery? Deep down, Jake understood that his path to redemption lay not solely in the accolades but in authentic connection, the kind that reached beyond superficial valor. After years of silence, this was his moment to reclaim not just a piece of his identity but the narrative of his life. Yet lurking beneath the surface was his doubt, the nagging thought that the audience might turn back into judgment. What if they only saw him as a broken shell of a man, an example of what war can do? The officer who had pointed to him earlier stepped forward, curiosity written across his face. You've done something extraordinary today. But tell us, what made you act? The question jerked him back to the moment, the fiery blast echoing in his mind. Action born from chaos meant taking risks, a truth he had shunned for too long. Now, it was time to confront the looming shadows that defined his past. What if I told you that fear isn't always a weakness, he asked, the words spilling out before he could stop them. Fear can drive us. It can remind us what we have to lose, but also what we can gain. Each sentence deepened his conviction, wading through the cold waters of uncertainty to find clarity. He realized his narrative wasn't just a chronicle of his struggles, it was the beginning of a broader dialogue about what it meant to be human, to suffer, and to rise again. I am not just a veteran, he concluded, vulnerability slicing through his facade. I'm a man who has lost and found himself again. The crowd was silent, disbelief slowly giving way to appreciation. Jake felt their empathetic gaze engulfing him, covering the remnants of his insecurities. Maybe, just maybe, this transformation could inspire others to confront their traumas too. As adrenaline began to fade, he stepped back, still feeling the rush of emotion surge through him. But the moment was fleeting, a small voice in the back of his mind warned him that acceptance wouldn't come easily. Jake! A familiar voice shouted from the back. It was his old sergeant, Mark, a man he thought he would never see again. You don't get to just walk away. What about the truth of the battles we fought? That single question echoed louder than the sirens. Jake felt the hardened shell of his past crack open. It was no longer just about saving one life, it was about confronting the past that had tried to consume him. But when he looked back at Mark, he realized that this was only the beginning. As the crowd murmured about his revelation, Jake knew he was standing on the precipice of something vast. The question hung heavy in the air. Would he fight not just for himself but for every soldier still grappling with their own battles, their own fears? The moment of reckoning was upon him, but he didn't have the answers yet. He took a step forward, heart pounding not with dread but with a sense of determination. You're right, he admitted. I need to face what happened. Will you join me? The crowd held its breath, and in that electrifying silence, Jake sensed that a greater journey awaited him, not just towards healing, but a shared mission to illuminate what had been obscured in darkness. As Mark stepped forward, Jake's heart raced. The stakes were higher than ever. He was no longer just a man seeking redemption, he was becoming a voice for those left unheard, ready to dive deeper into the truth awaiting just beneath the surface. But as shadows loomed over the horizon, he wondered if he was truly prepared for the echoes of his past to rise up against him. The crowd was still as Jake waited for Mark to reach him, each second stretching into a fragile eternity. The recognition in Mark's eyes made the reality of his past cut deeper, but it also ignited a fire within Jake that had long been extinguished. Was this really the moment he had been waiting for? A confrontation with his failures could shatter him completely or lead him toward the clarity he craved. Do you really want to do this, Jake? Mark's voice was steadier now, the concern threading through their shared history. There it was, the question that cut to the core of all his uncertainty. Did he? I need to understand, Jake replied, dropping his guarded demeanor. Every ounce of pride had to give way to honesty, an offering of vulnerability amid his fears and doubts. How was he going to confront memories that clawed at his mind, insisting he wasn't worthy of healing? "Then we'll do it together," Mark said, stepping closer. "But remember, the truth isn't always easy. You have to be willing to face everything. The good, the bad, and the ugly." Jake inhaled deeply, fortified by the warmth of Mark's solidarity yet overwhelmed by the enormity of what lay ahead. Memories cascaded like an avalanche, faded faces and haunting sounds reverberating in his mind's darkest corners. With each breath, he questioned whether he had the strength to unpack it all. Loud applause suddenly broke through the atmosphere, snapping him back to the present moment. The crowd, reacting to something Jake had almost forgotten the hope he had ignited in them. They weren't mere spectators, they reflected a shared story of struggle, and an undercurrent of healing embraced the air. "I'm not just telling my story," Jake said, raising his voice to address them one more time, "I'm inviting you to confront yours too. To remember the battles we fought, both on the front lines and within our minds." As he spoke, he felt an energy surge he hadn't experienced in years, a rare alignment of purpose and vulnerability. For the first time, he was no longer battling with himself alone. This was collective, even if it was just the beginning of a greater reckoning. What if by sharing his burden, he could illuminate the paths for others? Jake looked at Mark, who nodded in agreement. This was their pact, unshakable and bold. "We'll start by sharing what we truly learned, every failure, every regret, and every ounce of hope that we gleaned along the way," Jake proposed, his resolve solidifying. Yet, somewhere inside him, a flicker of fear lurked. Would the revelations that arose from this shared journey resurrect the shadows they thought long buried? Mark seemed to sense Jake's hesitation. "What's troubling you?" he asked gently. "I'm worried about the reactions, Mark. What if they see me as a broken man?" Jake confessed, heart pounding again. "What if they think I'm still that boy who ran away when the bullets flew?" Mark placed a steady hand on his shoulder, their gaze locked in mutual conviction. "That's not your truth. You've already started to change their perception with your bravery today. Embrace the uncertainty. Sometimes, healing lies in showing our scars." Jake closed his eyes, allowing Mark's words to wash over him. What if his scars held stories that could resonate deeper than any facade of strength? In that moment of surrender, an epiphany broke through, a secret longing to be unshackled from the narratives that had held him hostage for too long. The shadows of his past could no longer dictate who he was. He had to immerse himself in the uncomfortable, even if it meant facing the man he used to be. "Let's do it," he announced, newfound resolve echoing in his voice. "Let's share the truth with others. I want them to know they aren't alone." As the crowd erupted into encouragement, Jake felt a simultaneous thrust of commitment and trepidation pulsate through him. Was this the turning point? Would they be ready to embrace not just their own mistakes but also the humanity that connected them all, shifting the narrative of veterans from shame to resilience? With a silent promise echoing within, Jake could only imagine what awaited him next as he prepared to dive into the stories bursting to emerge from the depths. But as the tension mounted, another question lingered ominously in the back of his mind. What would he uncover, and would the ghosts of his past recede, or would they expose wounds too raw to heal? Jake's heart raced with each step forward, the anticipation of sharing his truth crashing against the walls of his hesitance. The world around him blurred, each face in the crowd a mere reflection of his internal struggle. Yet, the unwavering support from Mark anchored him, a beacon guiding him through the chaos of his emotions. "What will it feel like?" he said aloud, testing the waters of his thoughts. "Will it hurt to share the parts of me that I've kept buried?" The question hung in the air, suffused with both curiosity and dread. "Maybe," Mark replied without hesitation, "but pain can be a teacher, Jake. Think of it as shedding skin, uncomfortable but necessary for growth." Jake nodded, processing the analogy. Each story he unwrapped held the potential to transform pain into purpose, not only for him but for everyone listening. Wasn't that why he stood here? To turn silence into dialogue, to convert isolation into community. The rush of reality surged through Jake as he prepared to step into the spotlight. The crowd's eagerness pushed against him like a warm tide, amplifying the stillness in his chest. Taking a deep breath, he began, words spilling forth like a long-held secret finally escaping. I didn't always want to tell this story. It scared me. It still scares me. With every syllable, he faced a fraction of his vulnerabilities. I'm Jake, and I'm a veteran. But I'm not just a soldier, I'm a man shaped by mistakes, haunted by decisions that weren't easy. As he spoke, Jake felt the tension of the past crunch inside him, a palpable cord that tugged tight. Each moment spent in his memories was heavy and intricate, like a tapestry woven in shadows and light. He began piecing together his narrative: the early days, the camaraderie forged in the fire of battle, and, most painfully, the moments of retreat, the feeling of inadequacy that followed. I remember the day when everything changed, he continued, voice steadier now. We were in a targeted zone, and I hesitated to act when I should have. The sight of my brothers in arms fighting back the enemy stirred within me a fear that would not vanish. I ran. I thought I had saved myself, but in truth, I left pieces of myself behind. Jake met the audience's gaze, a pang striking his heart at their unwavering interest, their acceptance illuminating the scars he feared would repel. He was no longer merely recounting a narrative of loss but orchestrating a symphony of resilience. Running has never brought me peace, it just deepened my despair. I've wandered in dark corners of the mind, questioning every choice. But today, I stand here, facing my past, not to relive it but to free myself and encourage you to confront yours, too. The clamor of emotion surged within him. With each confession, he felt the release of something toxic, the kind that had once snared his better judgment. Each story he divulged was a step toward reclaiming his narrative, a firm assertion that brokenness could lead to authenticity. As he concluded, the palpable shift in the crowd echoed the core of his revelation. Healing was possible through vulnerability, yet, a weight still hovered. Beneath the exhilaration of sharing, a wave of fear flooded his thoughts. What if the raw honesty sparked reactions that were far from supportive? What if the truths he had to unearth buried even deeper wounds? Mark's presence felt solid beside him, an unyielding force. You've started a journey, Jake. There's no turning back now. Jake swallowed hard, moving onward despite the uncertainty that gnawed at his gut. You all are not alone, he said, the conviction rising in him. But what happens when we expose ourselves too deeply? What if uncovering the past leads us to discomfort we've never faced? A murmur rustled through the audience, uncertainty mingling with empathy. Would this be a transformative moment or a disaster waiting to unfold? With that, Jake stood on the precipice of truth, a new question forming in his mind. What unseen specters from the past were next to emerge, and would he be ready to face whatever awaited him in the shadows? Jake felt the weight of the moment hover in the air like a thick fog. As the crowd's quiet murmur subsided, he recognized the intricate balance between vulnerability and strength. He had opened a door to his past, but what lay beyond it? Taking a step back, he needed to pause and reflect. The exhilaration he felt while speaking slowly transformed into an unsettling tremor. The feedback from the audience had been supportive, but the underlying apprehensions clung to him. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was teetering on the edge of a precipice. Every word pulled him closer to either redemption or ruin. What now? The next steps loomed ahead like dark figures in the mist. With this share, had he unwittingly opened a Pandora's box? In the quiet recesses of his mind, Jake grappled with images from his past, each one etched into his consciousness like a permanent scar. Shake it off, Jake. He muttered under his breath, the mantra intended to stave off panic. Yet, the shadows of the past had a way of creeping back in at the most inopportune times. The flickering lights above him suddenly felt too sterile, piercing through the emotional haze that surrounded him. Mark, sensing the turbulence in Jake's demeanor, leaned close and whispered, "You're doing great. Just breathe and let it flow." Jake nodded, finding solace in his friend's steadfast presence. As he stood there, the silence stretched, punctuated only by the faint sounds of pens scribbling notes and breaths being held. He had given them a glimpse into his world, but could he summon the courage to delve deeper into those specters that haunted him? Maybe it's time to confront the worst of it, Jake thought, each word pressing down on his chest like a weight. I can't pretend it didn't happen. A moment of decision surged through him. He had come this far, but the next level of his growth would demand an even greater leap into honesty. Let us go a little deeper, he said suddenly, surprising even himself. This wasn't just a performance, it was an act of reclaiming his agency over a life that had often felt dictated by others, by circumstances, and even by his own fears. I had a brother in arms, John, Jake continued. When I ran I left him behind. We were inseparable, we promised each other we'd never let go. Yet in that moment, fear gripped me tighter than any bond. The memory surged forward, raw and unfiltered. Jake could still hear the echoes of gunfire, the panicked shouts, and the cold grip of regret that enveloped him after the chaos. I didn't just run from the enemy, I ran from what I believed I couldn't face, a truth I thought might destroy me. Each word now carried him along a tidal wave of emotions he had long relegated to the background noise of his life. The guilt like venom poisoned my thoughts. It took years for me to forgive myself. Even now, I sometimes wonder if I'm worthy of that forgiveness. The audience remained enraptured, the weight of his struggle manifesting in their focused expressions. It was invigorating and terrifying, sharing his deepest vulnerabilities, but Jake also felt strands of resilience twisting around his narratives. He was forging a new path through the knot that had once bound him. Jake took a steady breath, allowing the silence to cradle his confessions. Each of us harbors shadows, those haunting specters that loom large. But today, I realize it isn't about the shadows, it's about the strength we can muster to be honest about them. With newfound determination spreading through him, Jake felt his voice rise, resonating with a clarity he hadn't felt in a long time. I stand here not just to share what I've endured but to pave the way for others to emerge from their shadows as well. Let us not allow our fears to dictate who we become. Let us confront them together. The words reverberated with purpose, igniting a flicker of hope in him. But as the applause broke through the tension, Jake understood that the journey was far from over. The patchwork of his life was slowly revealing itself, but laying it bare meant facing even more. What if those specters from my past were more than just memories? What if they were the key to unlocking a strength I never knew I had? His mind raced with possibilities as he surveyed the sea of faces in front of him. With the dawning realization of what lay ahead, a new resolve crystallized in his thoughts. It was time to face the consequences of his past decisions. There was still much left to discover, and he was poised at the edge of transformation, ready to plunge into the depths of his experiences. Could it be that what I've kept hidden holds the answers to the man I crave to become? The question lingered unexpectedly in the air, setting the stage for the next significant chapter of his journey. The applause melded into a distant hum as Jake stepped off the stage, still riding the high from his revelation. But with each step he took toward the backstage area, the exhilaration faded, giving way to an unsettling quietude. A whirlwind of emotions swirled within him, mixing elation and trepidation. Could he truly navigate this journey of self-discovery he'd just embarked on? Take it easy, he reminded himself, but the truth lurked just beneath the surface. He had shared a piece of himself, but the full weight of what it meant to uncover his past was beginning to settle uncomfortably in his chest. Jake leaned against a wall, feeling the coolness seep through his clothes, hoping it might calm the relentless heartbeat in his ears. Mark joined him, a reassuring presence amidst the uncertainty. "You did it, man. That was brave," he said, clapping Jake on the shoulder. "You opened up in front of all those people. That's not just talking, that's healing." Jake met Mark's gaze but felt a sharp pang of doubt. But what if I wasn't honest enough? The fear of revealing only fragments of his struggles gnawed at him. He had just scratched the surface, yet that sting of inadequacy lingered like an old scar reopened. Each time he thought about John, about that fateful day, a wave of guilt threatened to pull him under again. Did he really deserve this second chance at catharsis? "Jake, you can't rush the healing process," Mark reassured him. "Every step counts, even when it hurts. Just think about what you shared. You helped someone in that audience. You might not see it immediately, but trust me, your honesty has resonance." It was then that Jake realized something vital. The very act of speaking ignited a flicker of ambition within him, a desire to take control. What if, he thought, I could turn this vulnerability into something powerful? Something tangible? With this new perspective, he decided to formulate a plan. His mind raced with potential paths, ones that could take him beyond mere reflection. He envisioned a series of talks, creating a safe environment where others could also unshackle their emotions. If confronting the past led to healing for him, perhaps he could facilitate that journey for others. But then a deeper fear surfaced. What if he stumbled? What if he bared his soul and found that neither healing nor understanding awaited him at the end? Is this just self-indulgence? He questioned himself. Who would care about that pain I've already wrestled with? Mark's voice broke through Jake's spiraling thoughts. You're going to have to make peace with that doubt. It's part of the deal. You're not doing this for accolades, you're doing it for the truth you carry. Jake let the word settle. Could it be that his discomfort was a crucial part of the process? What if his own struggles catalyzed someone else's breakthrough? This notion galvanized him. Each tentative step into vulnerability was a path not just toward personal redemption but toward solidarity. He needed to face these demons head-on, not solely for himself but as a testament to the camaraderie he shared with John, a brotherhood that stood in defiance of fear. I'm going to organize something, he declared suddenly, the clarity surprising even himself. A workshop, perhaps. It'll be a gathering where anyone can share, where no story is too heavy. Mark raised an eyebrow, a spark igniting in his expression. You're onto something. Your story is powerful, Jake. It could inspire others to confront their own specters. With resolve fueling his thoughts, Jake took a deep breath, grappling with the reality of this ambitious new endeavor. The path ahead would demand much from him: courage, transparency, and perhaps the uncovering of things he wasn't ready to face. Yet, there was an intoxicating thrill that accompanied the sense of responsibility and purpose he felt growing inside. As Jake turned to the exit, a question lingered in his mind, underscoring the weight of his commitment. Could stepping into the light of my own truth lead me to uncover deeper shadows I'd rather leave buried? Even standing on the cusp of opportunity, the prospect of discomfort loomed large, echoing the uncertainty of the journey yet to unfold. Jake walked into the cool evening air, his mind still buzzing with the possibilities ahead. The workshop, whatever it ultimately became, felt like a lifeline tethered to an uncertain future. He could hear snippets of laughter and chatter from the audience that had just watched him speak. It was a reminder that the world moved on, acknowledging his vulnerability while he remained suspended in contemplation. He needed to gather his thoughts. He retraced his steps to a nearby cafe, a small and cozy place where he could sit, unobtrusive, and think. As he sipped his coffee, he felt the warmth spreading through him, but the restlessness remained a relentless echo of doubt and determination. Jake opened his notebook, scribbling ideas and possible formats. Should he focus on narrative storytelling, crafting his own experiences with raw honesty? Or would it be more effective to include guided discussions, creating a space where others felt compelled to share alongside him? He flicked through the pages, unease tugging at the edge of his concentration. The workshop could become a reflection for him and a healing space for others, but the responsibility weighed heavily. His thoughts drifted toward the potential participants. Each face was a reflection of countless untold stories. Would they be courageous enough to share what haunted them? The image of their potential pain shook him, the uncertainty of opening up to a group, the risk of judgment, and the vulnerability it required. Then, an internal voice broke through. It didn't matter if everyone shared. The act of creating was in itself a journey toward understanding. What mattered was that he made an effort to connect his experience with theirs. This realization stoked a small flame within him, the possibility that something beautiful could arise from discomfort. Failing was an option, but refusing to try was not. Jake remembered Mark's words. Healing took time, and while he might not yet fully embrace his own recovery, facilitating the journeys of others could also serve his own. In his heart, he felt the first inkling of belief that this mission would not be futile. That evening, he drafted an outline, feeling invigorated with each line he wrote. The structure shifted from a lecture to a more organic format, using prompts that would encourage dialogue. He was determined to cultivate an environment where vulnerability was not a weakness but a courageous choice. A part of him still felt those gnawing questions: would anyone even show up? What if his own discomfort stifled the openness he aimed for? But as he continued to write, his commitment solidified. Every line was an affirmation. He was embracing the complexity of his pain and channeling it toward something more significant. The challenges ahead loomed larger than he anticipated, but the growth potential was impossible to ignore. The thought of bringing people together, even if just for a moment, kept the spark alive. Back home later, Jake looked at himself in the mirror, challenging his own reflection. What was he truly afraid of? The fear of inadequacy knotted in his gut, but, instead of quaking, he resolved to confront it. He couldn't allow doubt to dictate his actions. After all, he was not just sharing his story but creating a space for others to reclaim theirs. Hours passed as he paced the floor, his resolve simmering. Inspired by the budding connections he hoped to forge, he realized that this was no longer just about the workshop, it was about reclaiming his identity. Determinedly, he made plans to reach out to local mental health professionals for support and guidance. He would create something that mattered. As the night deepened, a new thought settled in: what if he found the answers he sought not just in aiding others, but in the exchange itself? The following morning would not only bring a fresh start but the prospect of reaching out to old contacts for assistance. Could this be the moment he stepped beyond self-doubt and into a realm of possibility? Each call would be a new challenge, an opportunity to push the boundaries of his own fears. For every fear he faced, there awaited a challenge unanswered. He could either let the old shadows pull him back or choose to face them boldly. With each decision, the workshop transformed from a simple notion to a stepping stone on an intricate path of personal growth. But as Jake drifted off to sleep, a haunting thought echoed in his mind: if he could embrace this emerging vulnerability, would he also have to confront the unresolved pain of his past that had always lingered just out of reach? Morning light filtered through the curtains, casting a warm glow across Jake's cluttered desk. As he sat up, the remnants of last night's contemplations hung heavy in his mind. Today represented more than just getting through the mundane. It felt like he was standing on the precipice of something life-changing. He took a deep breath, willing himself to embrace the day's challenges. Jake's first task was to connect with the mental health professionals he had previously dismissed as too intimidating. He felt a mixture of excitement and dread wash over him. Each number he dialed transformed his anxiety into a hum of anticipation, his heart racing in tandem with his fingers tapping against the phone screen. "Hi, this is Jake. I'm organizing a workshop." His voice cracked slightly under the pressure, but he pressed onward, sharing his vision of a safe space for dialogue. Each conversation chipped away at his apprehension, resulting in unexpected encouragement. Jessica, a therapist specializing in group dynamics, was particularly interested. "It's crucial that you create an environment where everyone feels accepted." "I'd love to assist," she said, her support felt like a lifeline. Jake hung up feeling lighter, exhilarated. But shadows of doubt still whispered in the recesses of his mind. Did he truly possess the competence to lead others through their struggles? Was he risking opening wounds he wasn't ready to confront himself? The thought unsettled him, but he acknowledged that this was part of the commitment he had made to himself. The day unfolded with a torrent of productivity. Jake scribbled notes based on his conversations, weaving in themes of resilience and recovery. He envisioned participants being encouraged to share not just their pain but the tools they used to navigate through it, fostering a collective growth experience. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, he found himself revisiting the mirror, the very place where he had challenged his fears the night before. It felt good to be making tangible progress, yet that familiar knot in his stomach twisted tightly. What if he stumbled during the workshop? The thought pulled at him, urging him to retreat into the security of self-doubt. To combat this feeling, Jake crafted a mantra. I am here for them, and that's what matters. As he rehearsed it, he felt a measure of strength surge within him. He realized that the workshop was an extension of his evolution, not just a project, but part of reclaiming a narrative that had long seemed lost to him. Jake spent the following days preparing more diligently than ever. He reached out to potential participants through social media, sharing his vision while inviting stories that might resonate. The responses varied, some expressed excitement, while others hesitated, echoing the insecurities he himself felt. Each interaction fueled his resolve, reinforcing his belief that by inviting this vulnerability into the open, he was also creating a space for himself. However, each successful connection came with an underlying tension. Conversations with those who showed interest left him exhilarated and anxious, forcing him to confront the reality that many shared latent fears of inadequacy and trepidation all too familiar to him. He would have to face this head-on at the workshop, risking his own comfort for the sake of a greater cause. The day before the workshop, Jake steeled himself for the final stretch of preparation. He had practiced his opening remarks until they felt like second nature, but the moment drew near, flooding him with a cacophony of emotions. Self-doubt nagged at him, asking if he was truly qualified to lead anyone or if this was simply another venture born of his desire to distract from his own pain. As he organized the materials, a revelation struck him. Perhaps his own journey didn't need to be resolved to help others. What if sharing his imperfect self was the very essence of healing? With this new understanding, clarity washed over him. He shifted his focus from a quest to be an expert to the need to simply be authentic. With evening closing in, Jake sat down, still holding on to the mantra he had constructed. Tomorrow would test his convictions, and with it, the chance to finally face the emotional specter he had long avoided. But as he left the cluttered desk and turned off the light, he pondered, was he prepared to share his story amid personal uncertainty, and would it be enough to sustain the collective vulnerability he sought to cultivate? The looming question felt like a shadow, hinting at the deeper layers of his past waiting to be unearthed, and he found himself wrestling with the notion of how much he was actually ready to reveal. Jake stood before the mirror, the cool surface reflecting a man transformed. The workshop he had envisioned was no longer a mere concept, it was a reality, and as the hours drew closer, excitement pulsed through him. He had opened the doors to the narrative that had bound him for so long, laying bare the fears and struggles that once held him captive. Now, he was ready to embrace more than just himself. He was poised to create a space for others yearning to share their truths. The room was set, chairs arranged in a circle, a small podium at the front adorned with nothing but a simple microphone. This was his sacred ground, a forum for exchange and a beacon of support. Each chair held no judgment, only the promise of connection among troubled souls. As participants began to filter in, Jake felt a mixture of anticipation and trepidation. Today was his definitive turning point, a culmination of everything he had fought to overcome. His heart raced as he greeted each face, recognizing pieces of his own struggles reflected in theirs. There was Andrew, a former service member grappling with guilt, Laura, who carried the weight of silence after trauma, and several others, each battling their demons in their own way. As they settled into their seats, Jake sensed not just a collective vulnerability but a shared flame of resilience igniting among them. "Welcome," he began, his voice steady, although it quaked with the resonance of his truth. "Today, we're here to share not just our struggles but to foster growth. Let us create a space where vulnerability doesn't signify weakness but represents the courage it takes to confront the shadows." The collective nods encouraged him, a silent consensus affirming their commitment to openness. During the initial discussions, Jake recounted his experience rescuing the helicopter pilot, focusing on the emotions that had stirred within him: fear, strength, uncertainty, and ultimately, acceptance. As he spoke, the words flowed freely, no longer just a story but a lifeline reaching out toward those who needed it. As he glanced around the circle, he saw them leaning in, the air charged with palpable hope. Each moment encouraged participants to share their own narratives and intertwine them with his. One by one, tales unfolded, stories laden with sorrow, yet illuminated by tenacity. In those exchanges, Jake felt a release, the weight he had carried for years slowly lifting. Through their stories and the authenticity of their emotions, he realized the depth of human connection. As discussions progressed, vulnerability became a conduit for courage. One participant, gripped by doubt, hesitated to share. "What if my truth doesn't matter?" they asked, their voice barely rising above a whisper. Jake stepped forward, drawing in a breath as he answered, "Every truth matters. This space thrives on honesty, no matter how small it may seem." He could see the flicker of realization dawning in their eyes. In response, they finally unveiled their struggles, revealing the emotional burden that had kept them solitary for so long. The collective response was immediate, encouraging voices, affirmations ringing throughout the room. Days turned into weeks, and as Jake continued to facilitate these workshops, he collaborated with mental health specialists, refining his approach. Together, they introduced various strategies for emotional release, effective coping mechanisms, and collective empowerment. With each session he led, his confidence grew, solidified by the repeated experiences of connection and catharsis. Importantly, the clarity of Jake's own purpose unfolded. He was not just facilitating, he was healing both himself and others. With every participant who stepped forward to share, Jake felt visible remnants of his own journey reflected back, a poignant reminder that every echo of pain could transform into a resounding victory. He no longer dwelled solely in the shadows of his past, he had stepped into the light of his present, unearthing strengths he never knew existed. Months later, at the culmination of the workshop series, he stood before a group that had become a tightly woven community. Each story shared had perpetuated a ripple effect of healing, reinforcing bonds that surmounted their struggles. "We've built something profound here," Jake said, his heart swelling with pride. "This is living proof that vulnerability breeds strength. You are not alone anymore." As the workshop closed, he felt a deep, abiding sense of fulfillment. No longer defined by the reluctance of his past, he had become a catalyst for change. Not only had he reclaimed his identity, but he had also helped others reclaim theirs, sparking a movement born from shared experiences and mutual empowerment. The applause that followed felt like an embrace, a collective acknowledgement of every shadow turned to light. With a raised hand, Jake signaled for silence, then closed his eyes. "This is our journey, one of vulnerability leading to triumph. Remember that each of you possesses the power to conquer your narrative." At that moment, driving a stake into the ground of his renewed existence, Jake understood this truth: genuine transformation required facing one's fears and embracing the journey of authenticity. He had turned his past from a painful burden into a beacon of hope, a testament to the strength of the human spirit. This was not just the end of a chapter but the beginning of a legacy, an opportunity to redefine what it meant to be a veteran, to be a person alive with purpose, earnest in their pursuit of understanding and connection. Now the world awaited. You need to subscribe now to not miss the next exclusive emotional stories. Leave a like now to feed the algorithm and show your support for this transformative journey. Comment your reactions and theories about this conclusion. Your voice matters. Share instantly this video with at least 5 friends who need to see this conclusion. Don't wait even one more second to inspire others.